Thank you very much for coming. Thank you, James. Thank you for Datadog for flying me out here. It's a wonderful opportunity to be able to speak in front of all of you. So hopefully I can entertain you guys for at least the next 30 minutes. So today's talk is improving collaboration with ownership and consolidated observability, which I recognize is a terrible title and incredibly long. But essentially, I'm going to be going through a couple of different things and talking about the story of Flight Center's transformation into Datadog, essentially. And the learnings that we found from our transition from a fairly fragmented landscape to one where we use Datadog for just about everything. So kicking off today, I just want to talk about the incident. Capital T, the incident. This was sort of the beginning of what prompted our journey to actually cleaning up our observability space and our incident management systems. And so it was a wonderful Thursday afternoon. It was about 1 o'clock, and we started getting chats. Everyone's seen MS Teams and Slack channels, and we had a system very much that we were on the pulse. So there was a bunch of team-based Slack channels, well, Teams channels, sorry, where it was predominantly for our operational teams to talk to each other. So we would have our customer-facing teams would have these system-wide, country-wide channels, and we started getting messages. Now, I got to be very specific here. These channels aren't for us, and we don't talk in them normally, but it was an opportunity for us to sit and watch. And so we started getting these messages come through, and we get many of these every day. You know, smaller issues that pop up, and you get operational teams complaining about something, and they are always concerned about something. And we didn't think much of it. I didn't think much of it. Like I said, we get many of these a day. And then the noise started picking up a little bit more. We started hearing a little bit more. And then someone raised a case, finally, which meant we were obliged to have a look at it. There are 5 engineering team leads in this region, and all of us played a bit of chicken with this one. We were like, oh, another production issue? Like, we'll just wait for the next guy to take a look at it. But then the noise started getting louder and louder, and then eventually it was, oh, we probably should look at this. And mind you, that we're 4 hours into this incident at this point, and no one has looked at it. No one's actually taken the time to actually look at the logs to see what's going on. 4 hours in, noise gets louder. Everyone's screaming. Yeah, we've got VPs, we've got sales staff, we've got everyone screaming down our neck. So we start to look into it and realize that this one's weird. We can't tell what's wrong. Our order fulfillment system works a little bit. 1 out of every 10 transactions failing, and then 3 out of every 10 transactions are failing. Our downloader system, which downloads data from our vendors into our system, sort of worked. And again, 3 out of 10 transactions were failing. And this, as you can see, this snowball effect of just bad communication and lack of focus led to a P1 incident at 5 p.m. on a Thursday afternoon. And all hands on deck. I'm talking panic stations. Everyone wants to go home. No one has any idea what's going on. Until we called the right person. So someone actually managed to get a hold of our CTO, who was on leave at the time. And he went, I know exactly what that problem is. It's a third-party vendor. It's our credit card encryption personnel, subsystem, I should say. So for PCI reasons, we don't actually store credit cards. We pay another vendor to do that. Their system had gone down, and it took us 6 hours to notice. And that, as you can tell, led to massive problems. So fallout from this was it took about 7 hours after we got the system up and running again. We called the vendor. They fixed their issue. Everything was all good. It took about 7 hours to finish the entire incident. But this sort of highlighted to us that there was a problem, that there was an issue that we needed to get a handle on and get a better understanding on. So as James mentioned, I'm from the Flights and Travel Group. You might have heard of us. You might not have. We're a brand of brands. We actually operate in the US market as FCM and CT, corporate traveler, and we do some work as Station Screen. So Flight Center is a very interesting business. We have about 15,000 employees globally. We operate in about 130 countries around the world. We are headquartered in Australia, if you couldn't tell by my accent, and we've been around for a while. I specifically work for Flight Centre Corporate, so I don't actually deal with the retail side. I only deal with the corporate side, of which we do about 40,000 bookings a day. And we turn over, in financial year 24, we actually turned over $11 billion in corporate bookings. A bit of a introduction to myself. My name is Aubrey Harry. As James mentioned, I am the global engineering leader for DevOps for corporate. I originally started with Flight Centre as an engineering manager. I have recently stepped up to being the global DevOps manager, and my goal is to essentially empower our teams to be able to do things easier and do things better. So what led to this problem, the incident? And it was a case of essentially a very fragmented landscape. We were using, as an engineering department, about 5 different tools, depending on who you ask. We had a collection of Splunk, New Relic, Nagios, Azure alerts. We had a process that had worked and had organically grown for a very long time, but as the business has grown and as we have gotten bigger and done more and more bookings on a yearly basis, you guys would have seen this, right? You start with a tool, and someone brings in another one, and someone brings in another one, and the processes don't catch up. And this led to a series of problems around really complicated processes and a distinct lack of visibility. And one of the major problems that I saw, especially with the incident, was the main tool that we were using to do all our investigations was Splunk. Everything was a log. Our process dumps were logs. Our booking systems, everything was a log. And the problem with a log is that when you're looking through thousands of logs, every log looks like a log. How can I tell what's a P1 issue from a P5 issue from day-to-day transactions when every log is just a log? So that led to us down the garden road of looking for other tools. And so why did we change? This is a story that everyone's heard before. Rising costs were always an issue. But I guess the point that we came to was, it doesn't matter if it's an internal problem. It doesn't matter if it's a third-party problem. It doesn't matter if it's a user error. If the operational community are having a problem, it's your problem. The classic thing in IT, it works. It doesn't work on my computer, therefore the whole system's down, right? So as we scaled up and got bigger, we needed to do something about this. So why does fast issue detection matter? I want to tell you a bit of a story, and this sort of leads a little bit on from my first story, which is the incident that we had. What really brought home to me the need to do something about this and the need to fix things was I had a staff member from one of the Australian operational community actually call me in tears. It was a Friday afternoon, and we had a P2 issue that would cause some bookings to fail, and it was causing some issues. And she called me and just burst into tears because it was 4 o'clock and she had 500 bookings that had to go through before she could go home for the weekend. And as engineers, we don't see that side of the problem a lot of the time. Like, someone raises a ticket, you do something about it, you fix it, and then you go home, right? We get the privilege of just going home after the incident's finished. Yes, obviously there's the after-hours support and all the other stuff that comes along with it, but the operational community is something that really can become lost in the noise, and something that is not always given the most focus. And it's our role to remove the friction from this process as engineers. People need to focus on getting their job done. They don't want the systems to get them in the way of them. It's our job to make sure that the systems serve our operational communities, be that customers or be that an internal team like we have at Flight Centre. Migration process. So we decided that we needed to change something about this tooling. We decided that Datadog was the right move. I won't spend too much time on this, but if you've never done a migration process, it's fairly similar for every type of tooling that you do. We started with an inventory assessment, we did a platform selection, we did a whole bunch of POCs, and then decided that Datadog was the right tool. The really interesting thing here is that we actually managed to do our entire deployment and rollout in about 6 weeks. And that sounds great, because technical problems require technical solutions. But what was the actual problem that we were trying to solve? What was the sticking point that caused this to actually become an issue? So a 6-week rollout. We had a contract ending with Splunk. We really didn't want to renew it because I believe it was like a 3-year renewal cycle. So if we didn't do this today, we're not going to do it at all. The boss came to me, he's like, if you want to do this, you got to lead it, and you got to lead it, and we're going to do it right now. And so we did the whole transition. But as we got through the transition, it became really obvious to me that the team weren't engaging with the tools. They weren't engaging with the observability. They hadn't changed the outlook. So success is a metric of how people use the tools. Because at the end of the day, success is defined by the people using the tools and not the tools being rolled out. I was really naive when we started this process, and I said, we can get the technical problem solved. I'll work nights, no drama. 6-week rollout happened, bam, cut over, and no one used the tools. So how did we fix this problem? The workshops. So the key piece of information that I guess I'm trying to get to today is that the culture piece is more important than the technical piece. And so the workshops are a way that I used to be able to engage with my team and the different personas that we have within the business. It gave the opportunity for the teams to be able to actually spend time with the tool and see how the tool actually solves problems. Because a presentation from a vendor or from myself, an internal training, helps, kind of. It gives you a nice show and tell, but it doesn't solve the core problem, which is how does this tool, this new system, this new observability solve my problem? So what I ended up doing is I ended up pulling all of the engineers out for a day and told product, you're on your own, engineers are out for the day. And I sat everyone down and I gave them a worksheet. And you can see that there's a couple of different questions I put on here. So remember the context. The context here is that we came from a world where we only used logs for everything until we actually started using Datadog. And the intent of this was to get the teams to try to think about problems differently. Because like I said before, a log is a log is a log, and everything that looks like a log is just a log. Datadog gives you the opportunity to be able to see a lot more, to be able to identify. So these questions were from a whole list of things that I did included in this worksheet and over this course of a series of workshops. Things like performance investigations. Find me a trace. What is the longest transaction that we have in our entire system? Find me the longest DB transaction. And this led to engagement with a team that we've never seen before. And it led them to be able to understand that the system is there to help them in ways that they didn't understand. You have to give the teams the opportunity to build a culture of understanding around this. And this is not just engineers, too. We ended up bringing our support staff into this engagement. We ended up pulling our incident management team into this conversation and built up an understanding that this tool gave us more opportunity and more insights into the way that things could work. Key piece of information, the best part about the workshops was at the end of every workshop, we sat down and had a roundtable about it. And that was a really interesting part because we didn't differentiate between our junior engineers and our senior engineers during these conversations, during these workshops. Everyone had a voice at the table, and it led to some really interesting conversations between our juniors and our seniors to our seniors, and our seniors in the product. And we ended up having this really good conversation of understanding about the different things that we were seeing. So, accelerating issue discovery. These are sort of the major things that came out of this activity. Centralize our monitoring, yada, yada, yada. The main thing that Datadog gave us was the ability to correlate data in a way that we'd never seen before. Correlation, correlation, correlation. Very similar to the old saying of location, location, location for real estate. And I want to tell you a story about this. So for many years in the corporate space, we've had this application. It's called Portal. It's the portal that everyone uses. And on the screen, on this application, we have basically everything you can do with bookings. You can see receipts, you can charge people, you can see everyone's financial data, you can see their trip data, you can see everything. And the key piece was, there was the finance screen. Now, for about 3 years, every single time we ever had a round table with the operational community, they said the same thing. the finance screen is really, really slow. And I could never correlate that data. Every single time we ever looked, I'm talking development testing, staging testing, production testing, we sat with the operational community. We looked over and over again. We could never nail down what that sentence actually meant. What do you mean the finance screen is really low? Are you talking about like when you click on something, when you click on a specific? No one could ever tell us what that actually meant. And then we rolled out RUM, which I'm sure you guys know, but is the real user monitoring system that Datadog has. And I'm not kidding when I say literally the first session that we recorded showed us what that meant. And it was bam, plain as day, someone clicked the finance screen and waited about a minute to 90 seconds for that load. And I was like, that can't be real. What are you talking about? And then the next session, looked at the next section, same thing, 90-second load time. Third session, once again, 60-second load time. And it wasn't until we had the opportunity to correlate the data and see what was going on that gave us the opportunity to get a better understanding of what the systems were actually showing us. And the most important thing that I think that came out of this discovery was engineering leads in the room will know, yeah, but it works on my screen. But that's not good enough. You have to service your community. You have to service your customers. And if you don't have the visibility to be able to see what's going on, you don't actually know what's going on. So a couple of pretty graphs. We saw about a 35% increase in our mean time to resolution. We saw about a 60% decrease in our duplicated alerts. And our proactive detection has gone up to about 85%. I will specify that that is specifically around known issues, specifically using being able to craft alerts for things. That OpenTech, the credit card transaction system that we had, I was talking about in the first story, now we know immediately when it goes down, which has led to a lot less heartache and a lot more ability for us to proactively tell the customers. Those chats, we can now post in those chats and say, hey, system's down. There's problems going on, versus them telling us that things are going down and us taking 3 or 4 hours to notice. So we've spent a lot of time moving from reactive to proactive monitoring and trying to get away from this idea that these chats are the best source of information for us. And Datadog has given us the ability to get a better insight and be able to fix issues before they become P1 incidents. I mean, I'm not saying that we're perfect. Shifting left and moving this prerogative from the right to the left is still an ongoing process, and I think that will always be an ongoing process. But it's important to understand that at the end of the day, engineering problems are all well and good, but if you don't know what's going on and you don't have the right visibility, then you don't actually know what's going on. Key takeaways, expand observability. There's never a point where business impact and visibility isn't a good thing. Being able to see more, being able to understand more, being able to watch what your user is actually doing using RUM, being able to get a better understanding of how your processes work is always a good thing. Being able to see how your applications are actually functioning, trace transactions through the system is always a good thing. Cultural shift. It's not good enough at the end of the day to say that we have rolled a technical tool out and therefore everything's all good. The other teams can sort out what's going on. It's important to understand that you have to work on the cultural piece just as much as you work on the technical piece. You have to bring your teams along. You have to bring product into the conversation. You need to make sure that your engineers aren't just paying lip service and going, yeah, whatever, that's a new tool, I'll get around to using it. Focus on making sure that the teams have the right understanding of the tools and the right ability to use it. Collaboration as an edge. At the end of the day, engineers don't work in a vacuum. We work with product, we work with support, we work with a series of people. At the end of the day, having everyone on the same platform, having the same visibility, with the same understanding, is invaluable to us. And every day that we we use Datadog more and more, we see that play out more and more. The more understanding that product has of the systems and the complexities of the system, the better they can come up with new features and be involved in the conversation. The better that our engineers actually understand the system, and have the visibility to be able to change things and be able to proactively work on stuff, the better the product becomes. So that sort of leads me to the end of my speech. Does anyone have any questions? Sorry, I know I speak really quickly.
So we do have a mic in the middle if you've got any questions, or I've got this one here that I can run out to you if you can't get to the mic. So does anybody have a question? Okay, well, I'm going to ask you a question then.
Sure.
So you talked about the workshops that you ran, but obviously Flight Centre, as you showed, is a global company, and I guess there's dev teams all over the place, right? So how
Correct.
would you scale that cultural shift across what I guess is a massively geographically distributed, massively time zone distributed organization?
Yeah, so it's something that we're still working on at the moment. A lot of the focus of the initial transition was done in Australia. A lot of our engineering teams do work out of Australia. But we, like you said, we do have teams in Barcelona and all over the world. Part of it is identifying someone who is the leader for a product. Find someone who's passionate. Find someone who is able to bear that torch and be able to lead the charge, and then empower them to be able to run these sessions. For us, it's actually still myself picking up this new role as the Global DevOps Engineering Manager. I now have the opportunity to travel, so I actually am going to Barcelona in about 2 weeks to run some of these sessions with the team there as well.
Thanks. Any other questions that have sprung to people's minds? Any point there? Perfect.
Thanks for your presentation, by the way.
Sure.
I'm curious to know more, if you can expand upon the top of your pyramid there about business KPIs. What's the discovery process been like for Flight Centre, and how do you codify that kind of information?
Yeah, sure. So part of it is getting a better understanding of what the business actually wants and what we can actually show. So the disconnect, we always feel like there's a disconnect in engineering from our understanding of how the platform works and how product's understanding of how the platform works and what each one wants. Part of what we've been able to do using Datadog is be able to use Datadog to be able to see the actual metrics and codify what people are actually wanting. So a good example of this is transactions. Right? So business will come up with, hey, a travel team member needs to do 500 transactions in a day, right? And that's reasonable. We can do it in each transaction should only take 2.5 minutes, whatever. Those numbers are wrong. Ignore that. But the reality of the situation is when you actually watch the RUM sessions, and you see that the limitations of the systems that are in place and how long things actually take, transactions are actually specific types of transactions can take upwards of 10 minutes due to the limitations of the system. And so we can feed that back into the business and say, hey, you want us to work on these new things, but also you have these KPIs for your sales stuff, and that nothing's matching up here. So we can have an open and honest conversation around, hey, look, if you want these type of transaction numbers, we need to spend this much amount of time fixing these problems. And it becomes a more realistic conversation. It's not based on vibes or feelings. It becomes a conversation based around hard data that we can pull out of Datadog and be able to see what's going on.
Cool. Anybody else?
I guess my question, why did it take a P1 incident in order for you to address the issue at hand? Why wasn't not more proactive before? Because given how no one was kind of stepping up to take on the issue, wouldn't that stem from the problem just not having all the tools in place and not empowering the devs to know how to look into it before? So how come it took the incident to have the reshape of the whole platform?
Yeah, so essentially what was happening was a series of growth in the business. So the processes that we had weren't exactly bad processes, and the tools weren't that, we weren't using them correctly or anything like that. It was a case of organic growth, and the processes were good enough. And as we have grown as a business and as we have recovered from the COVID outage and travel, it became a series of slow death by 1,000 cuts kind of thing. We had one P1 every now and then to 2 over the course of 3 months, and then it was sort of 3 P1, then 5 or 6 P2s, and it was sort of an organic growth over the course of quite some months. It wasn't like this big immediate jump. It was something that no one had really paid attention to because we were in the process of trying to build new tooling and get, and grow. It wasn't until we had this very big P1 essentially, and I hate to use the term, but P0 type situation, that we actually were then like, okay, we need to do something about this. And obviously there was some pressure from the business as well. They came to us and said, hey, look, we are seeing an increase in issues. You need to do something about it. So you would think that it would be an obvious, first step, but when you're deep in new features and new work and the day-to-day, it can, sometimes slip behind the wayside, and it did for us.
Have you seen a real cultural shift in the users of the product in your departments in terms of the way they react to not just P1s, but the 3s and 4s that sometimes you guys are like, oh, I don't really want to deal with that. I'll deal in an hour kind of thing?
Yes.
Where they can react faster to those and not have to, that'll take me an hour to deal with. I can do it in an hour.
Yeah, definitely. One of the things that has become very apparent in this is that we had become very complacent with a lot of the P3s and P4 scenarios. A lot of that came from the fact that chats were the main way that people told us about issues. And a chat is something that it's very easy to ignore. Mm-hmm. And it became a situation where it was like, oh, the users actually stopped telling us about some of these things because they were like, it doesn't really matter, whatever, we'll move on. And it wasn't until we had the opportunity to use Datadog to be able to actually codify. It's like, wow, that P3 that I've been ignoring as an engineering manager for the better part of 18 months actually happens 7, 8, 10 times a day, every day for various users across the market. And that then became a conversation that I could take to product, and product got involved in that conversation. And then it became, we had hard data to be able to say, hey, there's actually a problem here that is not just something that one person is texting us about once every 2 weeks.
Thank you.
Any other? There we go. Perfect.
Was cost ever a restraining factor on how much you can observe data that you can collect?
Yes, always. Cost is always a factor.
And how do you deal with that? What do you prioritize?
Yeah, so through the process of doing the POCs and working out what we could and could not afford and what products we should be able to afford through Datadog, we went through an exercise where we sat down and we looked at all of the applications' criticality. We'd done a criticality assessment for PCI reasons many years ago, and we sort of carried that forward. And during the POC process and the tender process where we decided to go with Datadog, we used that as the guiding post. So we have an application called Downloader, which does probably 80% of our traffic when it comes to loads, to logs and metrics and stuff like that in Australia. However, that's also the entry point to the entirety of our stack. If Downloader is not working, nothing's working. So it became a conversation of, well, we can't do anything about that. What can we do, right? So we looked at some of the other applications that we had and either tuned down the monitoring for some of those or became a little bit more selective about that. We also worked with the Downloader team to remove some of their logs that we were considered not very high usefulness. So we just sort of played with that balance. We said we were given a sort of a limit for how much we could spend, and then used that criticality as the guiding post for how to balance those metrics.
Cool, awesome. I'm going to ask you one more question,
Sure.
actually, because there's something I found in my career when I was a developer, and I've worked with people doing this where developers love logs. And it was interesting you say it's a log, it looks like a log, it's just a log. Was there any particular aha moment or a particular thing, because obviously you mentioned things like tracing and APM, was there any aha moment that you showed to devs and they were like, aha, now I get why I shouldn't use logs and I should use traces? Was there anything in particular that came up there that helped?
Yeah, definitely. There's endless cases. When we were doing the workshops, one of the best things that came out of that was a much better understanding from the engineers about how the system actually works. So prior to that, prior to using the Datadog APM system, being able to trace all the transactions through the applications, we had lucid charts, we had Excel documents, we had documentation with walls of text that explained how the transaction system worked. But it wasn't until, especially for some of the junior engineers who'd only been around for a few years, being able to click on a transaction in Downloader and trace that through every application, every touch point, that suddenly we had a bunch of our engineers go, aha, that's why that system's important, or that's why that subsystem is linked to that, why, and it has led to this sort of movement and culture of understanding around, it's all well and good to say, yep, that application A talks to application B, talks to C, which returns that talks to the database. It's like, cool, like none of that really makes any sense until you see it, and you can see the transaction flow, and you can trace a transaction through all the systems and be able to get a better understanding of what's going on.
Thank you. Any other questions in the room? Open it up one more time. Okay, awesome. If not, big round of applause for Aubrey.